The most glazed antagonist in history versus the most glazed antagonist of today. Yujiro Hanma versus Sukuna. Who's winning this one? In JJK, of course, Sukuna is a legend, with Yujiro basically filling a similar role in Baki, with both basically being regarded as the strongest of their respective verses, also being regarded as masters of their craft. It seems like a pretty good matchup, especially when it comes to power, because there isn't a crazy mismatch in strength here. Normally in these videos, I'll take the side of one character if I think the fight is lopsided, and try to buff them so they could beat the other. Like, if I took Sukuna's side, for example, I would use high balls or even wank him in some areas. But here, I'm not doing that for either. I want to be less objective here and see how this fight would turn out if they were just thrown against each other randomly. On top of that, usually we do verse equalization, like for example, we'd give Yujiro cursed energy so he could be affected by domains and whatnot, but let's just do this as a regular battle with none of the extra stuff. Knowing Yujiro, he could probably figure out cursed energy somehow and would definitely have some of his own, but we're not even going to assume that here. Besides, this type of equalization isn't too necessary here, since Sukuna's techniques don't require targets to have cursed energy, even though it does kind of help him. This is just going to be a completely random encounter where both of them are trying to kill each other. So let's jump right in. First off, let's go over Sukuna's stats and abilities. What could the King of Curses do against the Ogre? For starters, let's look at his physical strength. I tend to place Sukuna around large city level in terms of his attack potency, based on scaling him against other characters' feats, and based on his own feats too. For one, 15-finger Shibuya Sukuna and Yuji's body heavily overwhelmed Jogo, who was strong enough to manifest an entire meteor and wipe out some city blocks. He was playing around here, and he didn't even have every finger. He wasn't even close to full power. Later on in the story, when we see him fight Gojo, that fight was consistently damaging a bunch of city blocks, and is pretty consistent and in line with what I just said, considering he's stronger at this point. Plus, in chapter 237, simply by snapping his fingers, Sukuna melted a giant block of ice made by Araume. Considering it's a giant block of ice being melted, this would require a massive amount of energy. It's not like just destroying a building. And considering this block of ice is the size of multiple buildings, that is really impressive, especially with him doing it so casually. Also, when it comes to his Divine Flame, plus his Malevolent Shrine, it creates a thermobaric explosion that could wipe out a portion of a city with ease. Again, we're trying to be more grounded here with the scaling and be more conservative with the estimates here, so at absolute bare minimum, we see Sukuna casually pulling off multi-city block level feats. And I think it's a pretty fair estimate to say he's large city level by this point. Yes, we can go above that, but we'll stick with this because it's conservative and consistent. Not a high ball or a wank, but not a low ball either. Now on to speed. Usually in my videos I'll use higher end estimates for Sukuna and place him at faster than light speeds based on certain feats against Kashimo, but I get it. I know those feats are contentious and there are valid arguments against them. Those are in the videos where I'm highballing a lot. And as I said, I want to be more objective in this video. You can't always be fully objective with power scaling because it's up to interpretation at points, but we can at least be reasonable. Sukuna is pretty comfortably massively hypersonic, beyond lightning speed at a minimum. Once more, this is based on simple x is greater than y scaling, as he scales above people who could keep up with Kashimo, and, well, he fought Kashimo too. Obviously he kept up with Gojo too, and not only did he win that fight, but he's consistently regarded as the strongest. So pretty much any speed feats from anybody else will upscale him. And of course he's beyond that, that's just at the minimum. Not to mention, it was full power Kashimo that he fought, and Sukuna briefly did hold his own while he was still in Megumi's body and injured from his fight with Gojo. This was for a very brief period, he did incarnate and heal right after, but still, that's impressive as is, and then once he incarnated, he took that fight with ease. Obviously for this video, we're using both him and Yujiro at their full powers. So, as a conservative estimate for Sukuna at his peak, he's definitely in the massively hypersonic range, which is thousands of times the speed of sound. And he's at least a few multiple times faster than lightning. For a better frame of reference, lightning speed is over Mach 1200. With our estimate, we're saying Sukuna's a couple times this speed. Now onto his actual abilities. We're going to ignore his cursed tools here because, first of all, we don't really get to see him use them to begin with, and we don't even know what one of them does. We're just doing his raw skills alone without any other tools or weapons. Sukuna has a lot of things at his disposal. For one, there's reverse curse technique, which allows him to regenerate. This isn't completely unlimited. Like, if you just completely obliterate him or stop him from using cursed energy in general, that'll stop him from regenerating, of course. As for his cursed techniques, we're just going to be going with Shrine here, and we'll ignore 10 Shadows because, first of all, that's not really his, and second, in the current arc of JJK, we're not seeing much of that anymore. Basically, in this fight, let's consider it Hei and Sukuna having already incarnated in Megumi's body. As a trade-off for not using 10 Shadows, we'll say he has his World Dismantle still, which we'll get into in a bit. Anyways, his curse technique is Shrine, and as you know, there's Cleave and Dismantle as part of it. Cleave could be adjusted based on durability, but there's a misconception that it completely negates durability, which isn't true. It could just be adjusted to a certain level. Outside of his domain, this requires physical contact. For Dismantle, this is a ranged attack. Most people can't see his slashes in the first place, but there are some exceptions. And as I mentioned, Sukuna does have a buff to Dismantle, which the fandom typically refers to as the World Dismantle. This one is a flying slash that actually does negate durability. It cuts space itself and tears through anything. The issue with this is, unless he's using some sort of binding vow alongside it, Sukuna has to aim it, use chance, and then fire it, so it's not automatically activated. So even if you can't actually see or sense the slashes, you can at least get an idea of when he's firing it if he's not using Binding Vows. As for the Binding Vows, this allows Sukuna to trade something off in order to adapt to the battle somehow. It's not a set ability and can be applied in a multitude of ways. Sukuna can also occasionally use Black Flashes too, which will significantly boost the power of his attacks. There's also Divine Flame, which requires him to use both Dismantle and Cleave. There is a restriction that Sukuna can't use this outside of his domain when he's fighting multiple people, but since he's fighting a single person here, he'll be fine, and he can use it outside of his domain. But despite its great power, it is really slow. It's more useful in his domain, Malevolent Shrine. Malevolent Shrine hits everything around him with slashes. Dismantle is used on inanimate objects and things without cursed energy, and Cleave is used on targets with cursed energy. So even though we're saying Yujiro doesn't have cursed energy here, this domain will still affect him. One side effect of the domain is that by slashing everything around him, it basically turns it all into dust, and when he activates his Divine Flame, it coats everything with explosive cursed energy, and effectively his domain will become a nuke at this point. Sukuna does have other abilities, but most only apply to JJK, like Hollow Wicker Basket is going to be useful here. There is also the fact that Sukuna has an extra mouth and 2 extra arms, as well as 2 extra eyes. And normally Sukuna would have access to 1 full heal at any point in a battle, but that's if he's in another body and then incarnates. We're assuming for this fight, he's already incarnated. Essentially, think of this as Sukuna in chapter 237. Now on to Yujiro. Baki's scaling is, well, absurd. As in, there's a lot of crazy shit, but also a handful of anti-feats. Just like Sukuna, we're going to try and be consistent here, but it is a bit harder with Baki. We'll start with Yujiro's strength. For one, he stopped an earthquake before with his fist, and this was pretty early on in the series. We know Yujiro is far stronger now, and this was done really casually. Later on, Baki also imagines fighting Yujiro, and this imaginary Yujiro is so strong that it causes an earthquake to occur. Other people could feel it too, he's not imagining this. So that earthquake feat should be pretty consistent. On the durability side, there is also the feat of Pickle surviving the meteor impact, which upscales Yujiro's durability, but Pickle was found farther away from the meteor even though one character states he may have been hit directly by it. It's still impressive though, but if he wasn't hit directly by the meteor, that is not an incredibly impressive feat to upscale Yujiro, even though it's a very superhuman feat. Worth mentioning though, in case someone thinks I forgot, but if Pickle were actually hit directly by this meteor, that would have been a huge feat. Although, even without this one, Yujiro still has pretty impressive feats. Let's keep going. Yujiro is consistently stated multiple times to be stronger than any man-made weapon or any military. No nation's army could kill him. Not only is this stated in this series, but by word of God as well. For reference, the strongest man-made weapon ever made, at least that we know of, is the Tsar Bomba. It's a nuclear weapon that created the most powerful man-made explosion in history, with a yield of 58 megatons. That's 10 times stronger than all of the explosives used in World War II combined, and over 1,500 more times powerful than the combined power of the nukes Little Boy and Fat Man used at the end of World War II. And the craziest thing is, the original design for this bomb is nearly twice as strong as that, and its power was limited so the test didn't produce too much fallout. Plus, this was in 1960, so who knows what the theoretical upper limit of nukes are now that we're 60 years ahead of that, and we don't know all the advances that have made with weaponry since then, or if there's any other secret projects that the government may have not told us about. I say that because a lot of the sources in Baki are from the government. Anyways, these statements of him being above any weapon or military are consistent. Using the Tsar Bomba as a baseline, that brings him to mountain level, but in case you think that's highballing, let's back it up a bit just to be fair. Personally, I don't think it's a highball given the consistency of this statement, and also Yujiro has been stated to constantly and rapidly grow stronger every single day, and with the demon face on his back, he can amplify his stats even further. So these statements and feats are actually kind of outdated compared to current Yujiro, so he might be beyond this by a notable margin. So if you think Tsar Bomba is pushing it too far, just based on military might and what we've actually used in war, and based on what we actually know about too, this should comfortably place Yujiro between large city level and mountain level. Multiple feats put him in the city level range at bare minimum, and even if we use weaker nuclear bombs to scale that statement about him, he can multiply his stats on top of that as well. Now on to speed. Yujiro's speed tends to be in the massively hypersonic range at the lower end when it comes to combat and reaction speeds, which is good against Sukuna. It's pretty much even. The easiest comparison is that he's also been stated to be faster than lightning, so, I mean, that makes it pretty easy for us. He's pretty much around where Sukuna is. His reactions and perceptions are also scaled to Musashi Miyamoto's, who could both fight and react really quickly. There is a panel that shows a reaction being done within a fraction of a second, and we don't get the exact number, but after 3 digits, it cuts off. That means he's reacting within a couple 10,000ths of a second, maybe even faster, placing him multiple times above the speed of sound. He's also faster than Kaku, whose attacks move at least 1,000 miles a minute, which is Mach 78. And again, Demon Face will buff his stats too, making him even stronger than this. So Yujiro's feats and base would place him below Sukuna, but with Demon Face multiplying his speed, that would mean he should be within the same range we place Sukuna in. It's essentially his version of Kaioken without the drawbacks of Kaioken. So we know he could dodge lightning. And we know he's beyond Mach 78 at least, especially with him being able to multiply his speed. And by the way, there is a panel of Baki supposedly punching faster than light in chapter 28 of Bakido, but the chapter after that explains that it's just hyperbole. So no, Yujiro isn't light speed, at least based on what we know now. But once more, this is pretty consistent, and it puts him around the same range as Sukuna's speed. So when it comes to stats, the two are within a similar range. There might be minute differences in speed, but using conservative and reasonable estimates for both of them, speed-wise they're virtually similar. And in terms of attack power, Yujiro might have the edge, but it's not for certain and we don't know how big that advantage would be. So since the stats are so close, it seems like this battle mostly comes down to abilities, which we haven't covered for Yujiro yet. Let's see what he could do. Yujiro's abilities are pretty versatile. He's a martial arts master and has learned every martial arts technique, even esoteric or exclusive ones not known publicly. By all accounts, he's also a genius. Not just in terms of combat, but like in general, he's just a genius. Sukuna is also a really talented and smart fighter, but a lot of that is applied to sorcery and just battles in general. This isn't to undersell him, he still is a genius when it comes to combat. Yujiro, on the other hand, is a genius not just in terms of fighting, but in every other field. And in terms of battle IQ, it is safe to say he has Sukuna beat, because he is a master of every single type of fighting. Anything that involves violence, combat, defense, offense, whatever it is, Yujiro is a master at that. On top of that, he's also a weapons master, and he can turn anything into a weapon due to this mastery, which is kind of crazy. He doesn't use weapons often, and he prefers to fight without them, of course, but he can even turn people into weapons, like he used Baki as nunchucks, which is absurd. Although I guess for this fight, we're going to ignore weapons, so that also means no cursed tools for Sukuna, and it's not like Yujiro has his own weapon or anything. Not that he would want to use one anyways. Yujiro has been shown on multiple occasions to copy attacks with ease, basically after seeing them once. He can instantly understand how they work and how to pull them off. His adaptability is pretty ridiculous. This applies to entire fighting styles as well. Once he sees something, he knows how to defend against it, how to counter it, how to replicate it, etc. But that leaves an important question. Would Yujiro be able to see Sukuna's slashes and adapt to it? Well, let's begin with if he can actually see them or not. Yujiro can predict the outcome of fights before they begin. He'd know right off the bat he's dealing with someone who's not a normal fighter. I mean, obviously, the dude has 4 arms, 4 eyes, and 2 mouths. But besides that too, he'll see that there's something else going on here. He also has perception so strong that he could sense Baki's fighting spirit across the world. He did this while he was in Africa and Baki was in Japan. And he does have his own sort of aura too, and I'm not talking like, just the TikTok term. I mean like legit, he has his own aura. So in Baki, there is some sort of level of extrasensory perception. Yujiro could also pick out weaknesses within people instantly with 100% accuracy, and with perception beyond modern science and technology. He could also instinctively react to attacks. His senses are incredibly fine-tuned, and in that regard he's constantly depicted as superhuman. I guess a good comparison is Toji and Maki with their heavenly restrictions, and obviously the latter did fight Sukuna, and actually did see his slashes. Sukuna compared her to Maharaga in that regard, which tells us that extremely fine-tuned senses like hers can see the slashes. Not to mention, you think it might be a little unfair to not give Yujiro cursed energy here, but that kind of brings up another point too. How would that work in terms of him fighting against Sukuna? Because obviously having 0 cursed energy, well, look at Toji and Maki. Look what happened with them. That's a heavenly restriction and it makes them superhuman. Him not having cursed energy might be more beneficial if anything. And since we're not equalizing stuff, this doesn't mean he instantly gets heavenly restriction abilities. However, I think there's a good chance we wouldn't need to anyways, like he could probably do a lot of this stuff off the bat. It is possible for someone without cursed energy to see the slashes, as proved by Maki. Combined with everything else I just said about Yujiro, I believe that, yes, Yujiro very likely can't see Sukuna's slashes. His perception and adaptability is amazing. We've seen that you don't need cursed energy to see them. You just have to have really fine-tuned senses. And on top of that, Yujiro can analyze Sukuna pretty well right off the bat. Also, one more thing I want to cover under this ability section, there's been occasional moments of souls being involved in combat with Baki. Souls do exist in Baki and can be moved between bodies, with some level of soul perception between characters. In JJK, it's a much more blatant and common thing. Like this came in handy with Sukuna, for example, especially if you could attack his soul directly. Someone like Yuji who could attack his soul, it was stated that that's deadly for him, being someone who's incarnated into another body. As for Baki though, there is one moment where Yujiro shakes a guy to remove his soul from his body, and it's framed as him being responsible for literally removing the guy's soul, like surgically. Baki characters can also astral project and move their souls through willpower when they die, like Baki has done before, actually pretty early on in the series. Although it's a bit contentious, and if Yujiro had soul manipulation like this, he could instantly win this fight by separating Sukuna and Megumi. So, because of it being contentious, and the fact that it's an insta-win, we're just not going to include soul manipulation in the fight for Yujiro. However, I think it is definitely fair to say that he has some level of soul perception, which could help. But again, we're trying to be more balanced here, and since that point is kind of contentious, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that he 100% can do that to Sukuna. So now, let's go to the actual fight. Let's have the battle take place in the middle of Shinjuku. Both are bloodlusted. Normally, they both probably would want to prolong the fight to enjoy it, but not here. They're trying to kill each other right away. Also, no weapons, which means no cursed tools for Sukuna. Just straight combat. So as we've covered in terms of physical stats, the two are pretty much relative to each other and we'll consider them as such. Speed is similar enough to say that they're equal. As for attack power and maybe durability, Yujiro probably has the edge with more impressive statements. and some somewhat impressive feats, but that's with the estimates that I've given here so far. Not to say Sukuna doesn't have his own great feats too, like look what happens when he uses Divine Flame. But Yujiro does have crazy feats on his end, and maybe we could say, yeah, he is physically stronger than Sukuna, but if so, probably not by much. And you could just as easily argue that this stat would be equal to here. Anyways, that's basically a longer way of saying abilities and strategy matter more here than actual physical power, considering how close they are in general. So here's what Sukuna has that Yujiro doesn't. For one, he has reverse curse technique. This can obviously be stopped and isn't infinite, especially by destroying his brain right off the bat, for example, or preventing the usage of cursed energy. But it's a good advantage on his side, and reverse curse technique can heal a lot. Sukuna also has the advantage in supernatural techniques, like obviously everything with cursed energy. He has healing. He has guaranteed hits with his domain. Even though Yujiro is going to be recognized as a building in his domain, he's still going to get hit with something, since the slashes will just go everywhere anyways. And Sukuna also has better ranged attacks. Yujiro has a better advantage in terms of battle IQ, hand-to-hand combat, adaptability, and likely strength to an extent. Yujiro is incredibly versatile, but Sukuna's manipulation of cursed energy could really help out here, notably with his various techniques. He has a much bigger arsenal in terms of abilities. As for the World Dismantle, this would kill Yujiro, but Yujiro could easily aim dodge it. Sukuna has to choreograph it to launch it, and even would make it more subtle and using debris to obscure it, like what happened with Maki, she was still able to preemptively dodge it just from hearing the chance at the last second. So yeah, if it does hit Yujiro, it's pretty much game over for him. Especially if Sukuna uses a Binding Vow to fire it off without the choreography. So, would he even perceive this? Well, I think it depends. His perception, prediction, and instinctive actions are so crazy that he could likely dodge this at a distance without a warning too. The World Dismantle isn't instant, it's very fast, but it still has travel time, which means it can be dodged. If it's done point blank, then it's pretty much GG's for Yujiro, unless he's actually way faster than we realize. But from a distance, he'll be good, and Yujiro would probably know not to get too close, especially if he sees anything like that once before. Sukuna has to be really careful here because anything he fires off will be used against him. Not in the sense that Yujiro is just going to copy what he's doing right away, but in the sense that Yujiro will instantly know how to dodge it, what to expect, and how to counter things. Yujiro's heat resistance is questionable at best, especially because his best feat for this is surviving a prolonged lightning strike. Regular people have survived this IRL, but this one lasted a bit longer, though we don't have a definite time frame, especially because in the anime, we didn't really see that, it was just in the opening for it. Beyond that, we haven't really seen much for heat resistance feats from him, so how would the Divine Flame affect him? As for the blast itself, Yujiro would be fine, especially if he just, well, exits the domain in time. He would be fast enough to dodge this, and it's not like he's going to get trapped in the domain. And I mean, even in Baki, like, they don't use nukes on him, partially because obviously there's going to be a lot of collateral damage, but also because he could just run away from it and be fine. Also, with Yuichiro, his father, he was kind of in a similar situation where he was on an island that was being bombarded to try and kill him, and he just dodged all the bombs and lived that way. It's never explicitly stated that he was hit by all these bombs, and presumably he's just avoiding all of them somehow, but this shows us that bombs aren't enough to take down a Hanma. Explosions like this one are simply too slow for him anyways, and arguably not even powerful enough. But the heat could be an issue for him. And like I said, Yujiro could very likely perceive Sukuna's slashes. Of course, we can't be certain due to the difference in verses, but I think there's a really good case that could be made for that. So both of them are bloodlusted. Right off the bat, Sukuna is going to try and hit him with both types of slashes. He needs to use both Cleave and Dismantle on Yujiro. Only then could he use the Divine Flame. If Yujiro can't perceive and dodge his slashes, that's going to be really hard. Of course, he could activate the domain, but that's only going to hit him with one type of slash. Again, with no cursed energy, the domain would treat him like a building. Good thing is, of course, he could use it outside of the domain because this is a 1v1, but he still would have to hit him with both types of slashes. As for World Dismantle, he could definitely go for that too, but like I said, there are ways for Yujiro to dodge it. The biggest issue for Sukuna is that if he's up against a bloodlusted Yujiro, Yujiro is going to dismantle him as quickly as possible, pun intended. Yujiro can instantly perceive weaknesses and ways to take you down. He'd probably see right off the bat that, well, that extra mouth is going to be a problem for vows and stuff, and that Sukuna could heal as long as he has cursed energy. My guess is that in this situation, Yujiro would go for the stomach first, trying to at least rip open the mouth so Sukuna can't use that, and attack his stomach to affect his flow of cursed energy. Which of course not just affects healing, but everything else about him. However, that's not going to completely get rid of cursed energy, it's still going to be everywhere else in the body. That will just stop more being created. So I think Yujiro would go for that first, not just to get his second mouth, but also to stop the cursed energy in the process. At least cutting off some of his reserve of it. He's first going to be destabilizing Sukuna as quickly as possible. This is an issue though because he'd have to get up close for this. And if he does try to do this right off the bat, and Sukuna tries to use the World Dismantle, if Sukuna uses a Binding Vow and doesn't choreograph it, then Yujiro is going to get hit by that and then die right there. But if he uses it normally and has to choreograph it with the chance and such, then Yujiro could back off last minute. Because we're assuming he still has to do that here. Like I said, he's using Megumi's body, and it's basically after that first fight with Gojo, so he'd be required to do that. I think this fight mostly comes down to two things. How quickly does Yujiro figure out ways to counter Sukuna's techniques? And how quickly would Sukuna realize he has to use a Binding Vow alongside World Dismantle? Basically point blank as well. Hitting both types of slashes would be tough, but not impossible. which in turn means activating the Divine Flame would be tough. The heat would be a lot for Yujiro, but if he's not hit by it, it doesn't matter, and the attack is really slow. Plus, the explosion's not going to do much to him either. So I think Sukuna's best bet is the World Dismantle. I guess now is a good time for a conclusion. In my eyes, Yujiro takes this fight. It's definitely not easy, but it's not going to be near impossible for him either. He has workarounds for Sukuna's techniques, and this isn't even considering the fact that he's likely physically superior too. Sukuna is no slouch, and I cannot stress this enough. He is a really smart fighter. But his knowledge is more specialized, while Yujiro is a genius in anything related to fighting, as well as being far more adaptable and being a better analyst. Sukuna's win conditions are more situational, especially against the one fighter that could basically predict everything he's up to. Reverse curse technique is a problem, but one decimating blow to Sukuna's head, or even to his stomach, that would at least help mitigate the regeneration, if not killing him right away by having Yujiro go right for the head. Also, rip Megumi in the process since we're using that version of Sukuna. He's dying too. It would be pretty interesting to see how this fight would go against a Sukuna who hasn't been reincarnated into someone else's body, but the outcome would probably be similar, and the lack of World Dismantle would be a big problem for him too. Once more, it's worth noting that this is without using verse equalization or anything. The fight would be much different if we gave Yujiro cursed energy, or time to adapt to it, or whatever. Not just because it would change Yujiro, but also change how he fights Sukuna. And like I said before, this video is ignoring outliers and highballs for both series. Trust me, I've seen some insane wank for both sides, as well as doing that for Sukuna in some cases too. But let me know what you think below. And as usual, I know it's a power scaling video, so be civil in the comments. It leads to better discussions and less headaches. Do you think Yujiro takes this fight, or Sukuna? And how tough is it for the winner? As usual, thank you all for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in my next video.